Okay.
Okay, I think we're ready. I understand, Peggy, we have a quorum, right?
Yes, we do.
We're recording.
We're recording and the correct agenda is up on the screen.
I have my correction. Right, it's the.
Yeah, it's the general this time. Yes, sir.
Welcome, everybody. We have our quorum. And I thought we would start off with the people in virtual. Peggy, why don't you introduce yourself, and if you see yourself on the virtual screen, say hello and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Peggy
Go ahead.
O'Brien. I'm the local governments manager at the Rio Grande Council of Governments, and I'm in Marfa in the rural office.
Okay.
We can go with Adriana. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Adriana, as a proxy for Omar Martinez.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adriana Pulesio, International Business and Trade Development Manager with the City of El Paso, and I'm here standing in as proxy for Omar Martinez.
Thank you. We also have, for those virtually in person, we do have Chairman Reiner, we have Dave Hall, and we also have Dave Etzold, and then we have Alderman Thomas Black, who just joined us recently from our last meeting. So those are here. Those are the folks that are here in person. Arlena, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Am I supposed to have my camera on?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll turn it on right now.
Okay. And Arlena is serving as our one of our members of the public. Okay. Let's see. And Mayor Webb, are you on still? She just stepped away. I'll come back to her. Let's see. And Steri?
Hi, I'm Steri Butcher. I'm in Marfa and I represent the public.
She needs to turn her camera on too.
Yes, Steri's on.
Oh, she's on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tim Leary.
Yes, ma'am. How are you?
Hi there. And Tim Leary is.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I'm in Marathon.
Yes, sir. Representing agriculture.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Sean Woodard.
Yes,
Industry.
Sean Woodard, representing industries from Marathon Petroleum.
And we have Mr. Grijalva, the Lower Valley
Jerry
Water.
Grijalva, General Manager, Lower Valley Water District.
Thank you. Mayor Dunlap.
Hello, Dan Dunlap here in Marfa. I think I represent the commercial.
Yes, business.
Business, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Okay, and then Mr. Kennedy, this is your second meeting now, so you know everything
Yes.
by now.
Oh yeah, good afternoon. I'm with Presidio for Rural Economic Development, the city, the county, and the municipal development district.
Thank you. Okay, Raquel. Let's see. Raquel, are you on?
Hey, Summer's here. Can y'all hear me and see me?
Thank you, Summer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, I was mute or picked the wrong microphone, but Raquel Onsures, plant chemistry supervisor for El Paso Electric, representing the electric utility.
Thank you. Has anyone else come on that we did not announce?
No, everybody's. Oh, actually, John Albright, did you?
It's Roberto Ransom, El Paso County Economic Development Department.
Thank you, Roberto. And Roberto is practicing economic development. He's showing you downtown El Paso. It's a place you would want to visit. So thank you for that, Roberto.
I like that.
All right.
For sure.
Yes. Okay, so we do have our forms.
Okay, you introduced everybody here. I have a couple of guests back
Yes,
here.
your guests, yes.
So we have Jennifer Barr. I don't know if you can see her, but she'll wave her hand. She works at our water conservation group. So if you want to know more about water conservation, we feel like we're one of the leaders nationally in water conservation. So talk to Jennifer about xeriscaping, that kind of thing. And then Don Walker Hughes, they work together. And so we have two experts on water conservation, and they're always interested in our planning efforts. So I'd like to welcome them to our meeting. And looks like we have Jay Lonellis from the irrigation district. He's apologize for being late. And he's not late because it's just a special introduction for Jay. So everybody, welcome Jay to our meeting. Oh, Scott. Yeah, we got to take a person today, so it's a real honor. So I want to grew to golf course, Scott. Okay, so that is our welcome. Item number 2. We're ready for any public comment, right, Annette?
Yes, if anybody from the public would like to. I don't think we have anyone from the general public, but if they want to, they can at this time.
See no public comment. Item 3, recognition of guests and designated alternates. I think we've kind of covered all that.
Yes.
We had a good introduction. Okay, item 4, review and approve the minutes for the general meeting held on September 10th, 2024. Where's notes?
If there are no comments from anyone, motion to approve.
Second.
Dan Dunlap, a second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. And the minutes are approved. Okay, we're ready for item number 5. TWDB general updates by Heather Rose.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Rose. I'm with the Texas Water Development Board. I'm your regional water planner for Far West Texas. And just a couple quick updates from us. Can you scroll to the next slide, please, Becky? Yeah, so this is where we're at in the planning cycle. Y'all are talking today about, or you'll be approving hopefully your chapters 1, 3, and 4 of your regional water plan, and then you'll be looking at your draft chapter 7, 9, and 10. And the initially prepared plan is due to us, the Texas Water Development Board, on March 3rd. And at that point, I'll explain more detail in the next upcoming meetings, but you'll have your public hearings and make adjustments to that plan. And then the final plan is due to the board on October 20th. Next slide, please. And y'all can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry, should have started with that. So just a couple quick updates from us. We recently sent out a survey workbook to your consultant, Jennifer Jackson at Carollo. And she's going to be going over this in your chapter 9, but this is basically the implementation of your projects from the previous 2021 plan. And then in July, we held a joint meeting between our planning division and the groundwater division, and we talked to regional planning group chairs and also chairs of groundwater conservation districts and groundwater management areas to go over the process of where our two planning programs overlap each other and more how one feeds into the other, specifically groundwater management plans feeding into your regional water plan. And we did record this meeting, and that meeting is available online on that hyperlink when you download the slides from the West Water Planning website. And I found this meeting very helpful. So if you've ever been confused about groundwater management and kind of availability and figuring out what are model available groundwater, what's a desired future condition, and what does this all have to do with water planning? I found this presentation and meeting very helpful. So highly recommend checking out that link. They did a great job really breaking down the process. And then big news is we have officially our new executive administrator is Brian McMath. So he was our interim executive administrator when Jeff Walker retired, and now he's been promoted to our official executive administrator. And then we also have a new board member, Tanya Miller. So some new leadership here at the board. And I think that's it for me. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, and there's going to be a financial assistance workshop in El Paso on November 7th. And I know that we'll be in Alpine on November 7th. Unfortunately, that time was already set by our financial outreach folks. But if you have other folks that are interested in learning more about state funding opportunities for water projects, highly recommend, and they happen to be in the El Paso area in early November, recommend they attend this. If you can't attend this meeting, you can always set up a call with our outreach team by contacting them at that email, financial_assistance@twdv.texas.gov. And you can also request that they come out to your community and give a presentation if you'd like. At the previous meeting for Region E, there was a presentation from Enriqueta Caballero on our financial assistance programs, and that meeting, I believe, was recorded. So you're welcome to watch that presentation, but you can always just reach out to us if you'd like to hear the presentation again, or you want to get more information on our financial opportunities. And that's it for me. Any questions?
Hey, Heather, Dave, what kind of information or expertise do Brian and Tanya bring to the board?
Brian was the head of our government relations division for many years, 15 years, I think. So he definitely has a lot of experience at the board. That was before he was appointed as the interim executive administrator. And before that, he actually worked for the legislature for 20 years, something like that. I think he was, I can't remember which representative he worked for, but he has a lot of experience working with the ledge, which is definitely useful when you're a state agency. And Tanya, I think she's our legal expertise on the board. I do need to double check on that, but I believe that's kind of the role she's going to be filling is the legal expert.
So legal and legislative. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, we have Director Stephanie is our engineer. She came from TCEQ. I think she was there for most of her career. And then Director Pop was also a lawyer, but I guess at this point she's the financial kind of head of the board. That's what I think they were going for.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Heather. We're up for item 6. Report from Carollo on the schedule of regional water planning. Jennifer.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me go ahead and just get situated and share my screen for today's presentation. All right. You let me know when you can see it.
We can.
Okay, great. And if there's questions or hands raised, Peggy, you'll just have to shout at me because I've got 3 monitors and it's a little hard to manage all of them. So, okay, so for today's meeting, we will first start like we normally do with just kind of where we're at with our scope and a quick reminder on what we covered in our last meeting. So if you remember last month, We discussed any of the updates, feedback, or small changes that were made to both draft chapter 1 and draft chapter 2. And then we had a review of the red line revisions that we had worked on here at Corello and feedback we had gotten from stakeholders within draft chapters 3 and 4. And so this meeting is really going to be wrapped around reviewing and approving our chapters 1, 3, and 4, as I have not received any additional feedback. And then looking at our draft chapters 7, 9, and 10, and then of course we'll open up for feedback to be received really between now and the date of our next meeting, so that I can get those wrapped into those draft chapters for our November meeting. In addition to those two items, just kind of wanted to discuss with the planning group members what the timing is of this UTIP population study and how that may or may not impact our IPP deliverable, and then considering some other potential options that will help us plan with some uncertainties around these population projections. And then lastly, I'll just kind of debrief you guys on some of the upcoming work that we're doing to prepare for our November meeting and that IPP due date of March. So I know it's small print, but here is where we're at within this red circle. We're just all working towards this IPP deliverable to the Water Development Board due March 4th of 2024. And we're in line with not only wrapping up certain chapters and getting them approved for that deliverable, but also working on our task 5 water management strategy development. And that's the update for that agenda item.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. We're up for item 7, update from Corollo on the discussion had with the FWTWPG regarding the timing of the UTIP population study, impacts to the IPP deliverable, and consideration of the management supply factor as an option. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay. So within this agenda item, there's like 3 things that I kind of want to call out to your attention. The first is probably answering questions around like, have I received that draft study that we talked about at our September meeting coming from UTIP and Dr. Fullerton? What did that look like? You know, does it really warrant changing some of the chapters inside our regional water plan? So I wanted to provide an update on what I've received and the timing of that. So no, I've not received a draft study from UTIP, but what I was able to get is El Paso Water and the COG both sent me a message with an Excel sheet that I think Dr. Fullerton has developed. And that Excel sheet has the county tabs at the bottom and then a tab for El Paso Water and some of his population projections from like 1985 to was it 1985? Yes, down to 2075. Outside of that, I don't have any other information on his methodology or his approach or better understanding how he came to calculate those values. So that got me thinking, you know, as we continue to make sure we're hitting our deadlines and incorporating anything and everything that we can receive, it had me thinking that I probably need to reach out to the Water Development Board and have a discussion with them on where we're at with that data sheet with no draft study behind it and what's the next best steps for our regional water plan. So some of the items that I'm going to propose for the planning group to consider would be we would like to include that extra effort that the planning group contracted out with UTIP. So when there is a final report, I'm proposing that we include that as an appendix to our final submittal to the Water Development Board so that it's a part of your regional water plan for future planning cycles. But as an appendix, that doesn't hinder us from meeting some of the other deadlines that are out in front of us. And it gives Dr. Fullerton and his team some additional time to wrap things up. If that's the route we take, I still feel like it's of the desire of the planning group to plan conservatively and plan in such a way where we address this uncertainty in our population projections. So having spoken to the Water Development Board, within our scope and our guidelines, we do have the option to use what is called a management supply factor. And this option allows for planning groups to address uncertainty, not just in population, but also maybe in water demands, climate variability, potential droughts that the planning group may feel is more severe than the drought of record, and so on and so forth. So this became the discussion with Heather and myself and others, is, using this management supply factor as an option for us to continue to plan conservatively, continue to address the uncertainty in the population projections, and not hinder Dr. Fullerton's work with that final report, and then include that final report as an appendix. So I'd like to go ahead and talk a little bit about what this management supply factor is, so that you have a better understanding of what it is I'm proposing, and as a group can decide whether or not this actually addresses those population uncertainties. So again, the management supply factor is available for any regional water planning group to use. It is used to address uncertainty in planning, and as you can see here in those bullets, uncertainty can mean maybe our population projections are not what we think they are, therefore those water demands are not what we think they ought to be. But it also can be used if we've got some climate variability in our region, where we think maybe that drought currently is more severe than that drought of record. So it's a great tool for planning groups to use to kind of plan conservatively and address these uncertainties. So what ends up happening, according to the board's rules, is that the planning group would use this management supply factor for every WUG and for every major water provider. So it's very unique, and it can become very custom fit to that entity. And I will kind of show you what that calculation looks like, but please don't, get too worried about this equation. But basically what you'll get is a value that will factor in for any one WUG the total volume of the decadal existing water supplies. So that's our VE, plus the amount of water supplies that are going to come off of these water management strategies, divided by that decadal water demand for that particular WUG. And what ends up happening is you'll get a management supply factor of like 1 or 1.5 or 2. And what that's actually telling each WUG is that we're planning to where you may have a 10,000 foot acre feet buffer, or a 15,000 acre feet, buffer, so on and so forth. So in essence, what we're doing is we're taking a closer look at every WUG, and we're saying, well, since we don't really know what our population projections ought to be, and we're not in total agreement with what we've adopted in Chapter 2, we're going to create a buffer. And we're going to say, we're going to count for a little bit more, therefore we're accounting for a little bit more in our water demand, which means we're going to make sure those water management strategies that we're developing can come in and offer additional water supply to address, that little bit bigger demand. And so at the end of the day, whether that water demand is exact to the match of what the Water Development Board provided us when we were doing our Chapter 2, or it's a little bit more or it's a little bit less, it doesn't really matter, because we have created a buffer of water to be accounted for in our water management strategies to take on those, the growing needs and the growing demands. This to me is a really good way for us to continue to plan for that uncertainty in our population projections without delaying the effort of developing our chapters to get ready for our IPP deliverable, because we're waiting on the UTIP study. And I think what we'll find is whatever that study reveals, we will have accounted for enough growth that inside that conservative planning process through this management supply factor, we've actually accounted for what that study may or may not reveal, and we're not losing any time. One more slide, and then I'll open it up for questions if there are any. This just kind of gives an example. It's straight out of the board's guidance documents. So this is similar to what I'll be running for each WUG. But basically what we're saying is for a particular WUG, the management supply factor with a projected decadal demand of 10,000 acre feet, so that's our bottom figure, with a total of 5,600 acre feet in existing supply. Then they're going to bring on an additional 5,400 acre feet of supply with their recommended water strategies. And you divide that by that 10,000 acre foot decadal demand, gives you a management supply factor of 1.1. So you're creating a water supply buffer around planning for each of these WUGs with what that need and demand might be. And then the water management strategies are going to be developed to account for that additional conservative buffer of water. Questions? Okay, so
I just would make a comment that I think we're actually embracing uncertainty in population projections, and I think our plan as a result will probably look more realistic instead of saying, hanging our hat on one precise number in 30 years from now, which is guaranteed to be wrong. But now we're going to have a buffer, if you will, that will embrace, understand uncertainty a little bit better, and I think we're explaining that to the people that read this plan. Plus, we'll have the appendix. And I think having this UTIP data as an attachment or appendix will say that we believe there is uncertainty in population, and it's expressed by our need to get a different opinion. So that gets carried, and then we will further, Jennifer said earlier that she will further evaluate and see how much different, if in fact UTIP data is different than the data we're going with.
Yep. So I think what I can bring forward at our next meeting in November is I can look at the Excel sheet that was provided by Dr. Fullerton, and I can see what that projected population is for the decades 2030 through 2080. And I can provide a slide with that comparison so that the planning group can see if there's a big difference, if there's no significant difference. I don't need to wait to know what his methodology was to be able to provide you that information. Now, the question will remain, what was his approach? Was it utility-based or was it census and city-based? But either way, you can see, you know, from that side-by-side comparison, if we're looking at like big differences between our population projection numbers or, you know, very small, minute. The other thing I will bring is an example sheet having run this calculation for a handful of our WUGs and maybe one or two major water providers, so that you can start to see that if we are applying this management supply factor, what does that look like by WUG, and can, you know, have a better understanding of the conservative amount of water that we're going to plan for as part of this, you know, uncertainty around our population projection. So I think those two, you know, data points will be helpful. But basically what I'm proposing is that we do include the completed study as an appendix, but while he's completing that, we're continuing to move forward in such a way where we're planning conservatively and we're planning with this uncertainty in mind, so that we're not missing out on those deadlines. And I really think in the end, the approach here is going to actually absorb the growth that he may be seeing in his population projection process. And so in the end, we've done exactly what we wanted to do with that supplemental document attached to our regional water plan as proof that the group, you know, wasn't really in agreement with the Water Development Board's projections, and we got a second opinion, and it'll be a great springing spot for us in the next cycle.
Jennifer, Dave, are management supply factors linked at all to funding in any way by the Water Development Board?
No, so nothing changes with which strategies are eligible for funding. They'll all go through the same, analysis process. All it's doing is saying, we don't really think that that water management strategy needs to cover for 6,500 acre feet, because that's the need when you compare your demand to that water source. We're actually saying it needs to cover 8,500 acre feet. And that 2,000 difference is the buffer we're building in.
Yeah,
But funding
Dave,
is all the same.
Yeah, funding eligibility is all the same, and the scoring, it doesn't affect the scoring either for Smith Project, so there's no impact to potential funding.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Even though we've never used this historically, I do think we've come to a point where it's a really neat tool that we have at our fingertips that actually, to Scott's point, helps us to plan in more of a real life scenario kind of based way. We already know that the population projections from now until 2080 are an estimate, right? And every 5 years we try to come back and dial into that a little bit more, but it's never an exact, it would be very hard to be very exact with that. So then coming out of that, our water demands are a little fuzzy. And then the management, the water management strategies that we're trying to develop to meet those demands are a little bit fuzzy. This actually says it doesn't matter if it's not exact. We're going to build in a safety net of X amount of acre feet, and we're going to guarantee that our strategies are going to be able to cover those needs beautifully. Whether we're off 100 acre feet or 1,000 acre feet doesn't matter, because we've got in a contingency plan by building strategies using this management supply factor.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Sure thing.
We're ready for item 8. Okay.
Yep.
Item 8, consider, discuss, or take appropriate action to approve the draft IPP chapters 1, 3, and 4, and authorize Carollo to work with WUGS and or the TWDB on any final modifications.
Okay, so just to review with the group, this was a slide that I presented both in our September meeting and then in the meeting prior to that. Kind of sets up the stage for what does your chapter 1 look like. Chapter 1 is comprised of 13 sections, and then within that presentation, I dove deeper into each of these sections. But basically, I'm using this slide just to let the group know that all feedback has been received, all red line revisions have been accepted, and that chapter that was sent out on the COGS website is kind of the final chapter 1 that we'll be submitting as part of our IPP deliverable. And so that being said, I think it would be okay, to go ahead and as a group approve chapter 1 and also chapter 3. Same story here. It consists of 5 major sections, and I've received no additional feedback. We did a really great job emailing and calling, the WUGs and the sponsors in this chapter where there were paragraphs that needed to be updated. We received all those updates, and it's baked into now our final IPP chapter. And then for chapter 4, when I presented this chapter at our last meeting, if you remember, it's just a chapter that's got 7 tables and very little discussion at the beginning of the chapter. And this these first 4 tables are complete. The next 3 tables will come when we complete our conservation water management strategy effort. And then the board will provide our second tier water needs, our second tier identified water needs by category, and then again by major water provider. These are tables that I will insert into this chapter as soon as that data has been provided to me. So basically your chapter 4 is done. So what I'm proposing so that we're staying on track with our deadline is that we go ahead as a planning group, agree to approve those 3 chapters where all feedback has been received and all red line revisions have been completed, and go ahead and kind of set this on the back burner so we can focus on some of the other chapters that are still in their draft forms.
Hey, Jennifer, I made a suggestion on the feedback about a crosswalk between the needs and the strategies. Would that go in chapter 4? Or does that go somewhere else?
So yes, thank you for reminding me. Dave, when he did his review of chapter 4, had a great suggestion, and that is these tables are set up to where it's the name of the entity or the WUG and then the water need throughout the decade. But one thing that might be very helpful is to Dave's point, like how are these water needs being met? By which water management strategies are being used to meet these water needs by WUG? And so we have a beautiful table in chapter 5 that we will update as we solidify those water management strategies, where it was like E1 for the city of Alpine is an additional groundwater well. E2, I think you remember that table. So what we'll do is we'll just bring in a new column to one of these table 4, one of the tables in chapter 4, and we'll say this need will be met by this water management strategy E4. This need will be met by this water management strategy E7. And so you do now have kind of a crosswalk between your chapter 4, where we're starting to present those needs, and what's to come in chapter 5 when we're saying, hey, these are the water management strategies that will meet those needs. So yes, to your question, David, will come in here as a part of the final chapters that we will review before I can submit the IPP in March to the Water Development Board.
It'll be part of chapter 4.
Yep.
Okay, all right, thanks. If there's no other comments, I'll make a motion for the group to approve chapters 1, 3, and 4.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. I think we got all 13
Any
ayes.
opposed, please?
Any opposed? Motion
Just be sure.
Yeah. All right. She actually said yes. Absolutely. Okay, so we are now on to item 9. Consider, discuss, and review draft chapters 7, 9, and 10 of the 2026 Far West Texas Water Plan.
Okay, so joining me today is not only the Frieza Nichols team, Crystal and John, who've helped in the development of your draft chapters, but Becky Gates is online. She joined Corello several months back, and she has jumped in and saved my hide when it comes to the type of work that we're needing to accomplish for getting everything pulled together for monthly meetings. And so I just want to give a shout out to Becky. She's going to see some of her handiwork coming up here in some of the slides. But it was quite an undertaking to get chapter 7 updated. 9 and 10 are fairly light and was a little bit easier to update for you. But chapter 7 was a huge undertaking because it was such a robust chapter back in our 2016 plan when the Water Development Board added this as a scope item. And we did a phenomenal job back in 2016 to build a chapter that's, I think, 45 pages long that really details and outlines these 7 major sections. And so this chapter starts with like regional drought response, and we look at precipitation as a way to indicate drought stream flow as a way to indicate drought, spring discharge, and groundwater levels. Then it goes into a section where we're talking about like the current drought preparations and responses. So what are those drought response triggers that we have in place now throughout the region? More specifically, we have a section that just looks at surface water triggers, and then another section that just looks at our groundwater triggers. Then we have what we call a system capacity section where we're looking at the actual utility and what their triggers are, and municipal drought contingency plans, and then the groundwater conservation district drought contingency plans. I mean, it's such a robust chapter that when I got into it, it really did look like we needed to do some updating because we have a lot of figures and a lot of tables that stopped at 2019. And we all know we've experienced, droughts, depending on where you're at in the state, from 2019 to where we are currently. And I wanted our figures and our tables to actually reflect, all that new data. So this Palmer Drought Severity Index is figure 7-1, and I hope you guys do take the time to download the posted drought chapter and do your own review and provide me feedback where you think it's necessary. But I'm going to do some high level, here's what you can expect got changed, very high level, but there were a lot of details in this chapter that needed some updates. So back to our figure 7-1, this Palmer Drought Severity Index was updated. What the PDSI attempts to measure is the duration and intensity of that long-term drought, inducting circulation patterns. Long-term drought is cumulative, so the intensity of a drought during the current month is dependent on the current weather patterns, plus the cumulative patterns of the previous month. And what ended up happening is, like I said, we had data running us up to about September of 2019, which is yellow, so we're not in a drought. And what we missed, and I brought in for our new draft chapter, is all this data here between September 2019 and it goes into 2024. But because we haven't completed 2024, I just show you that we've come all the way through 2023. But you can see we've got drought, severe drought, extreme drought happening here between 2020 and 2021, then we fall back into it in 2022. So I think it was important to be able to come in and capture, some of that new data. That's going to be a common theme throughout this presentation for our Chapter 7 because every figure and table needed updating. In our figure 7-2, we are illustrating precipitation data for quadrangles. Now, I know you probably all don't, work with quadrangles, so I'll kind of do a high-level summary. The Water Development Board provides data, precip data, on their Water Data for Texas site, and they use these quadrangles. And so I was able to find quadrangle 602, which is portions of El Paso and Hudspeth counties, and then another quadrangle 704, which is portions of Brewster, Presidio, and Jeff Davis. What I wasn't able to do is capture the Culberson County in these quadrangles, but the precipitation weather stations are picking up close to those areas. So as a region, I was able to graph an average annual precip or annual precipitation for both of these quadrangles that help us to kind of cover the region as a whole and display it here as our figure 7-2. What we see is that the data does continue to indicate that the drought of record in the 1950s is our drought of record and was associated with 7 years of below average rainfall. The most recent drought of 2022 indicates that there is a trend toward below average annual rainfall that rivals with the drought of 2011. So depending on where you're at in the state, we definitely are kind of in a drought or coming out of a drought that was about as severe as our 2011 drought. And I wanted our water plan to be able to talk to that and stay current with our conditions. The average annual precip varies from about 8 inches a year in El Paso County to nearly 15 inches in Jeff Davis. So there's some discussion around, what does this mean when you're looking at the region as a whole? And at the same time, we have this really neat statement that alerts any reader in our plan that this region is accustomed to managing water supplies in a very dry environment. Thus, probably the best prepared regional water planning area in the state to manage their water resources during drought conditions. So, as you sit, in one of the most arid regions of the state. Therefore, it's normal for entities within Region E to have to manage their water resources during dry times. Therefore, when drought comes, it may tip the scale a little bit, but it's not felt as severe like as if you were in East Texas where you get a lot of rain. Okay. Oops. Figure 7-3, John and Crystal helped with the update of this figure to make sure that we were capturing into 2024 what the Elephant Butte Reservoir storage levels were in acre feet. So we've been able to illustrate that the most significant declines in capacity due to drought impacting the reservoir occurred between 1951 and 1957. So again, we're declaring that the drought of record was in the 1950s. However, reoccurring cycles of low capacity are obviously very evident, as you can see from these low levels here in our graph. So that's where we were using some of the precipitation data to kind of be an indicator to what drought looks like in our region. For stream flow, we have a figure 7-4 that is presenting stream flow at IBWC gauging station located on the Rio Grande just below the confluence with the Rio Conchos. This graph got updated. We have a statement in there saying, hey, the construction and filling of Elephant Butte Reservoir accounts for the data gap between 1914 and 1930. So that way the reader's not thinking we're missing data. We have peak flows since 1900 that have been decreasing after this construction of the Elephant Butte Reservoir. And the most extreme peak occurred in 2008. And so we're trying to explain why this, big influx of stream flow in 2008. So we talk about Hurricane Dolly in July, followed by tropical storms Julio in September, led to devastating flooding and failure of several levees. And that discussion goes a little bit further into detail. But we do a really good job, explaining what you'll be seeing in this updated figure in your chapter 7. Stream flow then goes into spring discharge. So we're trying to hit on every, piece of information we can use to kind of help build a story about drought in the region. One thing to note in figure 7-5 is that the only spring within the San Solomon Spring system that has a gauging station with a continuous period of record from the 1940s through current time is this Giffen Springs. So that's what's been plotted here as figure 7-5. The average discharge for all the measurements between 1941 and December of 2023 is 4.2 cubic feet per second. So that's the average. The graph does indicate that the longest period of below average flow within this period of record occurred between 1964 and 1981. And in fact, some of the springs within the system have ceased to flow. And we talk about, what could be contributing to that. Some of it is irrigation pumping in the local areas. So a lot of good figures have been updated to capture from 2019 to current day. And to kind of wrap it up is this groundwater level indicator where we're looking at groundwater elevation and comparing that to daily precipitation. And we can do this well inside the igneous aquifer. So figure 7-6 does compare daily water level data from an existing real-time monitoring well with daily precip data from a weather station inside Brewster County for the igneous aquifer. This data suggests that the response in the aquifer is quite rapid and occurs within a few days. So, you know, where you have peak rainfall events, you start to see a rise in the aquifer level. So this was a good, you know, place to kind of present and illustrate that this aquifer in particular is very responsive to these rainfall events. Okay, we move into a section where we're now starting to look at triggers, and in pulling together this table 7-1, I first will let you know that the orange kind of highlighted boxes is where we've been able to receive an updated drought contingency plan and where something has changed in that drought contingency plan from the plan we got in the previous planning cycle. So that's good. I mean, these entities are being active in making sure that their drought contingency plan gets refined and revised. And so we wanted to make sure that we highlight to you that this table is a work in progress. We have not received all of our drought contingency plans from the entities. We're still waiting on a handful. I know that Becky's been sending emails and placing phone calls, and Frieza Nichols, you know, is helping with a survey process where we're asking some similar questions in hopes that we can collect updated drought contingency plans for everybody and make sure that what we're showing in table 7-1 is an accurate reflection of what's in your drought contingency plans. And this table just summarizes when you're in a mild stage of drought, what is that? And then how do you, get the entity to that? And we do that for every water utility group or city. So we're still working on this table, but we've made some amazing progress. Then inside another section of that chapter, we have a table that talks about existing and potential emergency interconnects. And this is, a statute, and so we list that in our conversation before we begin talking about the table so readers understand, what the requirement was here and what our objective was. But we're to collect information on existing major water infrastructure facilities that might be used in the event of an emergency shortage of water. So it's just kind of a quick table that says these are the major water infrastructure facilities who have the potential to interconnect with other utilities that we've identified through a survey process or a phone call that will help with bringing on additional water supply during a state of emergency. Table 7-3 is what will the entities, do when they go into an emergency response. And we collected this information through a survey, and so we've updated the table. Basically, this table didn't change a whole lot. People are still, able to activate and really utilize these implementation requirements if they were to fall into an emergency state. But we wanted to make sure that we did a thorough review of it and brought in any kind of information we had collected from our surveys to update it. Okay. This table did change, as wells get plugged or are no longer selected to be, an active monitoring well. Entities might switch to a different well, or they may have drilled something in between, the regional water plans. This information is also provided by the Water Development Board, so I went in and downloaded the Excel file and just made sure that we were showcasing for Region E all of our current active real-time monitoring wells. And because the list changed, which you'll see in your draft plan, we then need to update figure 7-7, which is something Becky's working on because we wanted to plot the new state well locations and make sure that the figure that accompanies this table is aligned. So figure 7-6 is a summary of the 12 groundwater wells located within the region. In the previous plan, there was only 7 groundwater wells. So we're expanding and monitoring a little more closely with a few extra wells. Our figures are going to be updated as well. Okay, lastly, we have this section that we call other drought-related considerations and recommendations. And it was a brief, paragraph with information around what the Texas Drought Preparedness Council recommends. And Heather helped me collect some information around the recommendations that they're making in the 2024. I guess in 2024, they made some new recommendations. I wanted to capture that inside this section. And so you'll see, strike through 2 of the old bullets, and then there's 3 new bullets that come on. These are the 3 new recommendations in 2024 that the council gave all regional water planning groups. And so they've been included in this section of our Chapter 7. That is kind of my high level, review of the draft chapter. Are there any questions before I go into Chapter 9? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move through. Like I said, 9 and 10 are pretty light, but I do encourage all feedback. So if you have time and don't mind downloading the 3 chapters, kind of reading through it and making sure that there aren't other items that need to be addressed or other things that need to be updated or reviewed, I'd greatly appreciate it. Chapter 9 only has 3 sections. We have an implementation of the previous regional water plan. Then we have this nice comparison to the previous plan section where we compare water demands between the 2 plans, our 2021 plan and that of the 2026 plan. We do that for the drought of record. We do that also for our source water availability and our existing water supply. So we've picked out some things that we're going to compare to our previous plan, and we've built a really nice section that details that. And then the last section of this chapter is called Progress of Regionalization, and we have some good write-up in that section. But basically, your Chapter 9 provides a survey of the level of implementation and identified impediments to the development of the previously 2021 plan, those recommended water management strategies that have affected progress in meeting projected water supply needs. This chapter also offers a comparison of key components in that 2021 plan, and we're comparing those to this current plan. Lastly, we discuss the progress of the planning area in encouraging cooperation between water user groups for the purpose of achieving economies of scale and otherwise incentivizing strategies that benefit the entire region. So that is part of the write-up you'll find in this 3rd section. Small changes, and we'll step through them rather quickly, but you can see we're making edits on a small scale, and we're bringing in new content, that might be on a little bit larger scale. I thought I'd draw your attention to this section because it's comprised of a brief discussion focused on reporting the level of implementation with regard to the water management strategies in our 2021 plan. And we talk about how we've looked at this through additional methods for identifying projects that may potentially have been implemented. And we originally had these, black 3 bullets. But then it occurred to me in this planning cycle, we were asked to do that infeasible water management strategy analysis. And when we ran that survey with the help of the COG and others, we collected information around all the strategies in our previous plan and if they're feasible or not based on affirmative steps. If you remember, we asked, have you voted to spend money? Have you spent money? Are you in a design phase or a construction phase? So I added that as this new top bullet. Some of the ways that we're looking at those water management strategies in our previous plan and how they've been implemented and have there been any challenges that have stopped implementation, Well, we did that through this identification of potentially, and I'll go in and correct infeasible. It was the potentially infeasible water management strategy scope of work. So I've brought that information in. So with that in mind, there's a table 9-1, that actually is presenting the survey results. And I've only just provided you like a small screenshot of that table. This table, is much longer. But what I want to draw your attention to is within this optional comment column, I have actually decided to add where an entity has sought Water Development Board funding and they have a project number assigned to that. So the board provides a download of all projects that have come to them for funding, and the board assigns project numbers. And so as just another layer of information, not only can we answer the questions in this Water Development Board template, but I can also point readers to an actual Water Development Board project number. So we updated the table and then we brought in that additional information.
Hey, Jennifer.
Yeah.
What's the significance of the highlighted field in yellow that you have on the left-hand column?
Do you see yellow?
Yellow?
I don't have.
Did yours get highlighted?
Yeah. It's like
I'll see you now online.
Scan down.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. So you're looking at the table in the actual draft chapter, and it's not part of this little screenshot. That entity, okay, yes, that entity has not responded to a multiple series of surveys to be able to accurately provide information in this table. And so Frieza, Nichols, and Carollo were working on yet another round of survey and phone calls. And as soon as we can collect that information for the entities highlighted in yellow, we'll populate those responses to complete this table.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds to me like yellow ought to be red. All right.
Then inside that section where we do this comparison to the previous plan, we start to compare these water demand projections, plus we compare, our source water availability numbers. So basically what we're doing is we're taking, for water demand, we're taking the table we had in our chapter 2 in the 2021 plan, and we're comparing that to our water demand projections across the planning horizon that's sitting in our draft 2026 plan. So you can see here for Brewster County in 2021, we said water demand in 2030 was going to be 4,925 acre feet, but water demand is projected in our current 2026 plan to actually be 6,539. So it allows the reader in chapter 9 to kind of have this comparison without having to go get the 2021 plan, open it up to that, chapter 2 table, and then grab the 2026 plan, open it up to that chapter 2 table, and kind of do that. It's a little bulky and cumbersome. This summarizes it. And you'll see these types of tables in your, chapter 9 that are comparing the previous plan to this plan.
Is there any way to highlight needs in that same chart along with those numbers?
Oh.
Like if the 6539 had a need attached to it, you put it in red or something?
Let me think about this. That's a really good suggestion. So what might be helpful is, it might be helpful just to create another table that's comparing the needs in our 2021 plan to the needs in our 2026 plan, and have that be.
I'm going back to the same crosswalk stuff.
Yep. We don't currently have a table in our chapter 9 that's comparing needs, but we can add that. In fact, let me just advance to the next slide. So we've chosen to kind of highlight these bullets of where we're doing this comparison between plans, but I can come in here and add a new bullet and say, you know, identified water needs, and we can compare by developing another table where we illustrate the need in 2021 for that entity and decade and the need in 2026. So you have that crosswalk as well. In fact, let me just write a note to that.
So that would be included in that second to last bullet that has WUG and WWP needs?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good point. We might already have it here. Let me I don't have that snippet for the presentation, but if you're looking through your draft chapter 9 and you find that that table isn't aligning with what we're discussing now, just shoot me an email. But let me go in and make sure that we haven't already done that comparison, because I certainly don't want to duplicate. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, table 9.4
Mm-hmm.
or 9.5, 9.5 maybe.
And it has that comparison of needs.
Yeah, those are similar tables to the ones that I saw in 4 that I asked
Yes.
about the crosswalk on, so maybe there
Yeah.
too.
Okay, so you're recommending where we add that column that says, hey, E-2 is going to take care of these needs, just kind of bring that forward in some of these other similar tables.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to just make a crosswalk reference here. Perfect. And Becky's on, so I'm sure she's taking notes as well. Yes, we can do that.
I think it's easier for a reader to understand how we're going about fixing problems by seeing that.
I agree. I think we have a nice, robust chapter 5, especially our appendix 5A or 5B. But you have to be familiar with your water plan to know that appendix 5B is telling you how things are going to be resolved for each of the tables you saw earlier in your plan where we had an identified need. And if you're not familiar with the plan, that's a hard correlation to make. So I like your idea of this crosswalk. Okay, yes.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
On table 9.2, we talk about El Paso's demand in 2030 being in the 21 plan of 307,000 acre feet. And then in 2026, the demand is 367,000 acre feet. I thought with all of our concerns about population projections being lagging, our demands were going to be considerably less. But as I read through the 2026 demands for the next 6 or 5 decades, the demands are consistently higher in the 2026 plan as compared to the 2021 plan. I thought it was going to be just the opposite, with the state's population projection numbers being so low, we didn't really need any new water or new demands. Am I missing something?
Well, yes, and it's been a long time. In El Paso County, specifically to El Paso Water, there was growth throughout the planning horizon with your population. It just wasn't the significant amount of growth we thought we were projecting in the 2021 plan. So with the new data coming in off the census and then us revising that data based on our surveys and that national undercount, we were able to move that trend line a little bit closer to the trend line that we had thought we were projecting in our 2021 plan. So there was growth definitely across the planning horizon. It just wasn't that significant amount of growth that we thought we were projecting for in our 2021 plan. So there was never a decline. You were always, through the decades, accounting for more people, therefore more water. It just wasn't the volume that, you know, we thought we would be seeing based on our 2021 projections. So you're right. This table 9-2 is showing you that El Paso County as a whole has more, you know, of a water demand than it did in the previous plan consistently throughout each of the planning decades. But you'll see, like in 2080, you have 387,190 acre feet in your 2021 plan. We actually dipped down to 382,997 acre feet projected in our 2026 plan. So what we were trying to figure out back when we were looking at our draft values for that population and water demand effort to develop Chapter 2 is, yes, I see that for El Paso in 2030, I have 367,000 plus acre feet, and my demand grows to 382,000 by 2080. It's a steady incline. But if you compare it to your 2021 plan, it's actually a little bit less than what we had originally projected in our 2021 plan. And we talked about, like, you know, did we over project? Was there a little bit of inflation? It's what speared the effort to survey all the WUGs and kind of get that grassroots information and propose with our revised letter to the board that we really think those values need to be a little higher than what we originally started with. So Scott, we can talk offline because I know kind of where you're headed with this for El Paso Water. And I think we've talked specifically about building a buffer of 20,000 acre feet, right, in those water management strategies to account for some of this uncertainty.
But it does look, Dave pointed this out, the table below that's marked out in blue. In 2016, we had much higher annual projections, like almost 100,000 acre feet more per decade. So it almost seems like the whole water planning process says maybe our demands back 10 years ago weren't so realistic, and we're tightening it a bit.
Right.
So, okay.
Yep.
It's still, I expected to see less demands in this plan with a lower population growth than in the 2021 plan. So it didn't make sense to me. I'll kind of trust the process right now, but I thought it'd be just the opposite.
Yeah, and I know it's been a while, but when we were reviewing our Chapter 2, there was a graph that had 3 lines that were each colored different. And we had our blue line, which was our water demand projections going across the planning horizon from our 2021 plan, and it was the highest line. And then we had the board's original data coming in, and it was a different color line. It was kind of a flatter line, not as large. They weren't projecting those water demands to be quite as large. And then we went out and surveyed, and we added this national undercount, and we got a gold line kind of somewhere in between our 2021 really high projections and the board's, original data. And we felt like that was an okay start, okay, so we've upped it from what the board said our data looked like originally by surveying and collecting all that good data, but we're not as high as our 2021 plan. And so there was growth across the region, not just El Paso County, but region-wide. We were growing. It was just a more flat trend line, growth across the planning horizon versus our very steep, projections that we had in 2021. So yeah, review the chapter. And if you have questions or if something doesn't look right, call me or write me an email, whatever's convenient for you. I'm happy to not just discuss it with you, but review it once more, and make sure that we've got the data in correctly. Okay, the last piece in Chapter 9 is this comparison between our recommended and alternate water management strategies in our 2021 plan and what they will be in our 2026 plan. And as you can see on the screen, I've got this yellow highlight over this summary sentence that says, the 2026 plan contains a total of 48 recommended and 10 alternate. That sentence is an old sentence from our previous plan that we have to update once we have our final list. And right now, Frieza Nichols is supporting Corello by talking to the WUGs and talking to each project sponsor and trying to collect information around, hey, these were your strategies in the previous plan. Are they still valid? Does something need to come off? Do we need to add something new? We're trying to come up with a clean list that we can present to the planning group and say, okay, this is your list of strategies based on all these survey efforts and phone calls for each WUG. And once we have that final list, I'll be able to do this comparison and I'll be able to update the sentence, not just how many recommended and how many alternate, but we have to price everything out using the Water Development Board's costing tool, and we'll get a total for the region. So this is on hold. I mean, there's, in this last piece of your Chapter 9, there are some things that will have to come in after we've wrapped up our Chapter 5 work. So again, just, you know, highlighting to you where the draft is, what we've been able to update, what we're working on, and what will have to come at a later time. But please go in and read it for yourselves and connect with me if you see something wrong or need to add some new information. Chapter, yep. Mm-hmm.
$1 trillion.
Okay.
Capital total for just this region
Yes.
and across the state. That's huge.
Heather could probably speak to that a little bit better, but I know it's hard to put both of us on the spot to know. But actually, we have 6 counties, and there are lots of regions that have 30 plus counties. And when you're doing strategies for WUGs in 30 plus counties, and you do a sum for your entire region for what that total capital cost is, I know 2 billion seems like a lot, but compared to other regions statewide, we are on the smaller end.
I mean, the 2021 plan in 2018 dollars was estimated at 80 billion for the state. So for 80 billion for the state in 2018 dollars. So plus inflation, we're gonna find out very soon what that's gonna look like for 2026, but it's probably gonna be, you know, on the order of 200 billion for the state. I mean, we've had some, like I had one Region H SWIFT project that was almost $1 billion for just one plan. So, yeah, it's expensive.
Significant, yeah.
Nickels and dimes.
Yes. So
Are we okay to?
the need across the state is 70 billion.
She said maybe 200.
No, 80 billion, 80 in 2018 dollars. So this next plan, yeah, we're anticipating it'll be more like, given with inflation, cost of things are, I guess, doubling. Things are getting more expensive. So we're anticipating it being closer to 200 billion, given inflation and cost of construction and all the new projects that we're anticipating because of growth and all that good stuff happening in Texas.
Jennifer, did you want to go over Chapter 10?
Yep, it's real quick because if you're familiar with our Chapter 10, it's just kind of talking about our regional water planning group, the project management. When we're our group meetings and public hearings, we kind of have to show, you know, that we've done that along the 5 years. So 5 sections inside Chapter 10. You'll see right away it starts with various tables that list out our current group members and their positions. I have updated tables 10-1, 10-2, and 10-3 to include our new members. So you'll see the new individuals have been listed here. And in addition to this information, there are 4 other sections that have some very small edits, things that I'll need to go into when we conclude, you know, that final public hearing where we adopt the IPP, and then when we adopt the final 2026 plan, I'll need to go back into this chapter and provide the date. So there's some yellow highlights that are just notifying Becky and I that something's, still hanging out there to be updated once we get to that point. Yep.
This is a question for Annette also,
Mhm.
but in table 10.1, this lists
Okay.
all the current members. Look here. See. And I counted 24 of them, and I'm always wondering what constitutes a quorum. And is it one over the 12? So it'd be 13 as per this table.
We have a couple more rural guys now.
So this
Thomas Black is missing from that one, yeah.
The other item to note is that if we're looking at, so maybe we need to update that table for you, Jennifer.
Okay.
I think we're up to 26 now.
I was just trying to use this table to understand our quorum
Yep.
requirement.
Yeah, so it's half plus one.
Yes, so with this up table that needs to be updated, there's 24 listings. And so half is 12 plus 1 is 13.
Right now we have 26. We have 2 that aren't on that.
So that'd be 14 is over.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why we need 14 today.
We got 14 today?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Okay, so what I can do, Annette, is I'll send this Word doc version out to you and Peggy. You can help me with the updates. I will, for awareness, let you know that this came directly off of the COGS website. And I was very surprised that you guys have already updated the website to include our new members. But if we're making changes here, we'll want to make sure we make changes on the website just to be aligned. But I was wondering, and so this is part of the, showcasing the draft and asking for feedback. So I'm glad we caught that.
Yeah, I believe that we both overlooked it together, but we
Okay.
had looked at the website just before the meeting just to see where we were at. So we'll check that
Okay.
again.
Yeah, I'll make a note to kind of set something up with you and Peggy. All right, and that is chapter 10. So I'm done with that agenda item.
So we don't need any action on this item. This is for
Nope.
information, right?
That's correct.
Jennifer, what's your no later than date to get feedback on 7, 9, and 10?
Okay, good question. Give me just a second to navigate to our little kind of Gantt chart that I was making for our use so that we know when to set up meetings and kind of stay on time with our deadlines. So let me just take a look so we can, here we go. Okay. So if you can see my screen, this is the Excel that we were operating from. And what I was proposing is, it looks like at our next meeting, we would want to approve Chapter 10, Chapter 9, and Chapter 7 with the same language that you see on today's agenda. That gives me the flexibility to work with WUGS or the Water Development Board to make, small modifications. And with a proposed November 7th meeting date, we've got 2 weeks, I think. So I would just say, let me look, if Peggy and Annette need material to post, I would have to have all of our feedback in by November 4th. So deadline for any kind of red line changes or revisions and feedback would be November 4th. Okay.
And then
And
for
then
posting on November 5th, is that it? There's only 48-hour posting requirement?
It's
Well, the
3
meeting-
3 days.
Yeah.
3 days,
3
okay,
calendar
so
days.
we
3
might
calendar
need one
days.
more.
So does that work, Heather, or do we need to back it up?
The 4th, 4, 5, 6. I think maybe you want to give yourself a day to compile it and
Yeah. So
put
what
it
if
together
we-
and post. So it needs to
Yeah.
be online by the 4th. So maybe give yourself a couple days
Yeah.
before that.
Okay, so let's say October 31st.
Halloween.
Deadline for changes, October 31st to me.
Has to
That
come
way
at
I
10.
can, That way I can have a day to kind of compile it all into a fresh, clean draft and then get it out to Annette and Peggy for posting.
But I asked, that's pretty quick.
Yeah. 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 I'm sweating over here just a little bit to see like, okay, we've got 2 weeks and I've got quite a bit that I need to wrap up for next month's meeting, but we're going to get there.
Okay, we're ready for item 10, report from Carollo on other regional planning efforts.
Okay, so just to update the planning group on what we've been doing in addition to what we've presented today, and what we'll continue to work on. Obviously, the Chapter 5 updates are in progress. You have your Chapter 5, and then you have your Appendix 5B, which is just the language around each of the strategies for each of the WUGs. So we are slowly making our way through both Chapter 5 and Appendix 5B and updating, you know, as we hear back from the project sponsors and the WUGs themselves. We've also developed a table that documents, if you can remember, back in our potentially feasible piece of scope of work, when we're looking at a water management strategy and we're trying to determine if it's potentially feasible, the Water Development Board kind of lays out 24 things that we at least have to consider these 24 things and then anything else we want. And there was a handout several months ago on that process. And we're following the same process as we have in our previous plan. The addition to that process was, if we've done this in feasible water management strategy analysis, and we now know that the board's kind of looking for that practicality of if it's in 2020, 2030, those, you know, really current decades, what have you done, you know, in the way of affirmative steps to kind of make that project a reality? That got brought into this document as another level or lens of how we're going to evaluate these strategies. This table is kind of required. I think it's just part of the digital submittal to the Water Development Board, and it's a handout. And I don't know if you downloaded that or printed the handout, but you can go back onto the COGS website and pull it off if you don't have it in front of you right now. And this again is just a snippet of that handout. But this table was a template that the Water Development Board provided all of the regional water planning groups. And it's asking us to kind of prove that we've looked at various strategies and determined, you know, for the areas that have a need. So you'll just see our needs here. These are the entities that have this water shortage. What strategies have we looked at and have we evaluated them to be potentially feasible? That's the PF, or not potentially feasible. That's the NPF. And so the process was, well, let's look at the water management strategies in our 2021 plan, focus only on the WUGs that have a water deficit, and then refer to our Appendix 5B, where we talk about the details around these water management strategies, and complete the board's checklist. And that's exactly what we've done here. And so we can, in addition to the submittal of our IPP and our final plan, we can provide digitally this table to the board that says we have ran through this exercise. What you will notice highlighted in yellow is that there are 8 new water utility groups with water deficits in this plan that we didn't have in our previous plan. So I just thought that might be something of interest. We've got 8 new WUGs that we're going to have to develop water management strategies for that we don't have strategies for in the previous plan because they didn't show a need in the previous plan. Any questions? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's David. I'm surprised at how many of the fields are marked not potentially feasible. Is that unusual, or do you find that to be true across the state?
Also, the other, David, all those NPFs are clutter. I'm just wondering
Get 'em out
if
of there.
that matrix could be empty except for the PFs. And it'd be much easier to see things.
Yeah. So a couple comments and then a question to Heather. To David's question about, is this normal? Are we seeing this kind of across other regions? Yes, because what we've done is we've said in the previous plan for irrigation Culberson, we had a strategy in there for them to reduce water use, and we had a strategy in there for them to have a new groundwater supply. We know those are feasible strategies because they were approved as recommended strategies and they've gone through the evaluation and the costing process. Everything else didn't have to be considered in order for irrigation and Culberson to meet their need. And so instead of creating more work, we're basing it off of what got approved by the planning group in the previous plan, and we're shoring up. We know we have a conservation strategy to reduce water, and we have a new groundwater supply strategy to bring new water supply on. This is how we're going to take care of that irrigation need in Culberson County because it's how we took care of it in the previous plan. All right, move on to the next. This is really just a checklist for the Water Development Board to see that their consultants and planning group members are looking at those 24 like recommended strategies as a way to meet water deficits for water needs within the regions.
But
And
Heather,
what
did the board suggest that any block that's NPF has to have an NPF in it, or
yes.
can it just be left blank to get rid of all the clutter? And
So that
say
was my
blank?
question. Yeah, so that's my question to Heather. This is the template given to consultants. So I don't know, Heather, if the Water Development Board would mind removing NPF. I have a hard time leaving a cell blank because it may come off like we didn't do our due diligence to consider it. At least with something in that cell, we're saying we've assessed it, you know, and we don't think it's feasible. But it is a board provided template.
I need to follow up with your question, Dave, because I would imagine it doesn't have to say NPF. It could say like not applicable or something like that. So I need to follow up, but I would imagine it's up to your consultant how they want to do it. We usually don't we provide a template and then we ask you to consider all these columns here in the checklist and y'all let us know. And then we don't really do any more scrutiny than that, but I'll follow up and double check.
Okay. And just to
It was an immediate eye test for me.
yeah. And to remind everyone here, this doesn't go in our plan. This is just a deliverable to the board in addition to our plan. So it won't be showcased in our plan.
We can't make it an appendix like our other thing.
We sure could.
That was sarcasm.
I'm sorry.
That was good.
That was sarcasm.
You know,
All right.
your chart that you have there as a sample, though, is probably a nice way to roll up the whole thing. Because what you've done is pull all of the potentially feasibles into one chart. The ones that I'm looking at, I've got like 8 pages, and there's one potentially feasible on each page, or a few more.
Yes.
You know, sarcastically, there's very few. So
yes.
A matrix like that is easy to look at, much better than 8 pages.
So is there value, Jennifer, do you think there's value in our plan of showcasing the non-feasible strategy so that if somebody says, hey, I got this great idea of doing this 3 years from now, we can go to the plan and say, this has already been considered. If you're going to consider this, do something different than this non-feasible, because there's lots of ideas that
don't go.
They recycle themselves every 3 years, and maybe if they want to recycle it, you need to do your homework and make it better than your previous one. Is there value, or you just start from the scratch each time, and there is maybe some history that can be learned. Just paying attention to this old strategy that was not feasible. Now things have changed. Water's cost more. Is this more feasible now?
Yes, I definitely agree, and I like that approach. I was kind of thinking along the same avenue and like including it in our chapter 4, like maybe the last table in our chapter 4 with a little bit of write-up, because I think it's a nice segue between 4 and going into 5, which is where we're now going to, in great detail, outline which strategies are coming on, what is that strategy going to bring on, how much new volume of water. And so at least in chapter 4, anyone can see, okay, you know, these were the ones that had water deficits where we're required to come up with a water management strategy. Here's what strategies were thought of as a potentially feasible, and here's which ones weren't. I like that idea a lot. So if it's okay with the planning group, I'll put it into our chapter 4, and it'll be one of those, you know, slight modifications made since we've approved it, but you'll see it when we go to review the entire IPP. We have to have a meeting where you guys review your entire IPP as 10 chapters before I can submit that to the board in March. So what are your thoughts about putting it in chapter 4?
I think we were talking and not listening. What did you ask?
Dave was
Guilty.
We're guilty of talking and not listening, so
Dave was
please
talking.
ask
I was
again.
listening to two people. So I didn't
Something
get it.
about
I
chapter
didn't hear
4,
either
that's all
one.
I heard.
Yes, so the question is, I think it's a nice segue between chapter 4 and chapter 5. So we can put it at the end of our chapter 4 with a little bit of write-up. And then chapter 5 goes into great detail all of the water management strategies that we said were potentially feasible. So there's a bridge between 4 and 5, giving a new reader an understanding of these were the strategies that we didn't think were potentially feasible. Here are the ones that we thought were potentially feasible. Now you turn into chapter 5 and you get all the detail around those feasible strategies.
Agreed.
Okay, so it goes into chapter 4. If we have flexibility with the template, how do you guys want this to look? You want blanks? You want NPF? You want not applicable?
No blanks.
I
No
tend
blank.
to agree with the comment that if you don't put something in a box, somebody's going to wonder why. So-
Okay, the color coding, I think you could change.
Okay.
It overwhelms us with red, bad impressions. I think the projects that are feasible should be blue for water, light blue, and everything else white. That's like.
Okay, I like it.
You highlight the feasible.
Highlight the feasible and forget the.
Everything else. Got it.
Yeah, let them have a white background.
Yeah, and we'll take away the yellow. That was just for this meeting. Okay.
Because when you look at the chart, you tend to see all of the non-feasibles first.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, I like that. I'll make that change. And that wraps it up.
That was item 10. We're working our way. We're at item 11. Consider Far West Texas Regional Water Planning Group membership dues for FY25 and FY26, October 1, 2024 through September 30th, 2026. This is Annette.
Yes, so we put at the very tail end, that way we know you want to get home, so you're just going to go ahead and say yes quickly, but no, I tease you. The agenda item is asking for approval on the budget, on the membership dues as they have been presented. I don't know if Peggy's going to put up the Excel sheet. So on the Excel sheet, the total contribution request that we're making is $64,892. So that's a 6.8% increase from our previous 2 cycles. So we're asking to increase our budget by $4,106. And so the way that we're looking at achieving that higher number is by obviously increasing dues. And the way that we're looking at doing that is where we're going to be increasing the membership dues for our groundwater districts currently, or the most recent cycle was at $300. We're proposing to increase those to $500. And then we would leave El Paso County Water Improvement District number 1 the same at $2,500 since they have historically paid at a higher cost. And so the remaining amount of money that we're asking for to recognize our increases in our budget would be absorbed by all of the other participating entities. And so as the executive committee reminded me, El Paso Water is the greatest contributor. And so their increase is about 6,000 so their increase went from 48,000 and change to the, I believe it says, is it 54,000, Peggy? I can't see from.
Yes.
Yeah, so to 54,000. So theirs is the highest amount of increase. I did not think to put in what the current numbers are compared to what they proposed to show the increase for all the communities, but everyone else's amounts are, I think, are at show at a smaller amount just because the population base of El Paso takes the lion's share in the budget since we're using those percentages of proportion of population. So
did I hear you say that this increase is over the past 2 cycles? Over the last 10 years, we haven't increased?
We haven't increased our salary, our membership dues for probably, I'd say at least, yeah, for 4 years probably. It's been about 60,000 and change for those 2 cycles.
Okay.
So we think it's a modest amount, but nevertheless, it is an increase. And so we would ask for consideration for the group to approve these numbers. And if they were to be approved, we would start sending out the agreement, which is also attached in the agenda item, where we would have an individual agreement per community for 2 years at these amounts to pay into the membership of the organization to allow us to serve as the grant administrator for this function. Are there any questions for me on this item?
The executive committee is recommending to the group that we approve this.
I have a motion.
I'll make the motion.
This is John real quick. I was just, as a new member, I'll do the research on kind of how these expenses are paid for out of operating expense or however for each entity. But is there, under these agreements, have there been any entities that have not paid their dues up to this point?
So there have been, Mr. Kennedy, we did have Horizon Municipal Utility District on our membership for several years, but the last 2 cycles they have not paid. So we have removed them before we close out the fiscal year. I will reach out to them once more to see if there is interest in them becoming members. But at this time, what we've done is those who did not participate, we did take them out.
Everybody else that's on this list has it paid annually, but not necessarily to the amounts that are increased.
This would be the first time.
Yeah. And as said, for about 4 years, it's remained the same. This year, it's increasing.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to confirm that, and surely it looks like a pretty good deal for the rural components. And thanks to El Paso, of course, for shouldering the weight.
It's about 87% El Paso.
So I'll second it if there's no other second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
What's up? No,
So
what's up?
I think the last agenda
It's
item,
okay. I'm just listening mostly.
Oh, Mr. Beck, you're not muted yet. Okay, so the last agenda item for adjournment, for the next meeting, we have it number 7. I'm just asking